Leadership is something that you find across cultures. It's one of the most talked about topics on the planet. But we can't seem to agree on what makes a good leader. Today's guest has done a lot of thinking at the intersection of leadership, entrepreneurship, and management. Dr. Franco Gandolfi is a professor at Georgetown University and California Institute of Advanced Management. And in this episode, we explore whether leaders are born or made, whether charisma matters in a leader, why leadership is actually an act of serving others, and what you can do to become a better leader. Here's my conversation with Dr. Franco Gandolfi. So, Franco, I did a lot of preparation for this episode and I saw that you really know leadership. And I want to sort of trace back your journey. Why was this something that interested you? What's the story behind this?
So I am a management scholar. So for the last 25 plus years, I've been studying management, strategy, and entrepreneurship. And leadership was a term I was not particularly familiar with, even though it came up every now and again. But I understood leadership in the framework of management. And it was about 10 to 12 years ago that I started hearing more and more about this thing called leadership. And I kept wondering, what is it? And why does it matter? And how is it different from management? And so over the years, I have evolved in my own understanding and learning and discovery. And I'm still learning. In fact, sometimes people refer to me as an expert on leadership. No, I'm not. I'm a student of leadership. And so I think about leadership every day. To me, it's like a lens. I look at the world from a leadership point of view. So it's not just some abstract concept or an idea or a philosophy. It's a worldview. It's a lens to me.
When I look at people who study leadership or people who've become leaders themselves, it's not as if they become leaders overnight, right? They also have leaders of their own. And so I'd love for you to talk to us about your leaders in your life, the good ones and even bad ones if they were.
Okay, first of all, I have learned the most from bad leaders about leadership. So the very people that have hurt me and disappointed me and abused me, I have learned from them a lot about leadership, what to do and what not to do. So obviously, we are a product of the people that we surround ourselves with, upbringing, background, family, parents, siblings, neighbors, friends, you name it. But over my lifetime in the workforce, on my travels and so on, people have impacted me. And I have learned about leadership from the people that have touched me positively as well as negatively. At the same time, of course, I'm learning about leadership from theory, books, articles, different sources of evidence from around the world. Combining the two, the pragmatic part and the theoretical part. That's a nice combination. And what I have realized, and hence that's part of my passion and excitement, is we don't know much about leadership at all. It's probably one of the least understood phenomena of our lifetime. Probably over-researched and over-talked, but widely misunderstood.
This is where I feel like there's this cycle. I'd assume a bad leader is born because they are the product of their bad leaders. And so if you just have a string of bad leaders, how does one break the cycle?
So leadership is not a designation. Leadership is not a title. Leadership is not an entitlement. Leadership is a decision. That's it. If you decide I'm going to be a leader, you own the leadership role. You decide I'm going to do something for the world. Now, leadership is always about others. It's never about self, but it starts with self. And that's probably the most foundational principle of leadership right from the beginning for everyone is it starts with you. It starts with me. It starts with us. But it's never about us. And this is where a lot of people get stuck. They start with self, and then they love the leadership part because They get all the attention, all the benefits, all the accolades. Let's talk about social media for a moment. You get a lot of, again, publicity, press, fame, you name it. And then you go like, yeah, I love this leadership stuff for the wrong reason, because it's all about self. No, it only starts with self. At some point, you have to go from self-leadership to other leadership. A lot of people don't make that transition.
Isn't the motivation inherently self-serving? Like, I'll tell you why. I watch a lot of these interviews of presidents and all these big name leaders across the world. And one question they're often asked, and you can see this across cultures, it's some flavor of the question. When you were young and you looked in the mirror, did you see a president or did you see yourself becoming this great leader? And a lot of them say that, and this is where I want you to help sharpen my judgment. A lot of them say, oh, I always wanted to help people. But it does seem logical to me that these folks wanted that power, quite simply. And so that's where I'm struggling to try and discern what are their true intentions.
So leadership intentionally or essentially is about servanthood. That's the very core essence. Leadership is servanthood. In other words, every leader is a servant, period. That's not very attractive for a lot of people. That's not even sexy. Servanthood? No, people want to be a leader for the obvious reasons. We can unpack them. But leadership is essentially about servanthood. So leadership is service. And every leader serves someone. The question is, who do you serve? A leader, this goes to the topic of purpose, mission. We can unpack this a little bit later on. The why of leadership. Why do you want to be a leader? Leadership is servanthood. Okay. Who do you serve? We all serve someone. The reason, who do you serve and why do you serve? Even a car mechanic is a servant to the car owner. I serve the car owner fixing their car. I'm a servant to them. That too is leadership, right? In a very small scheme of things.
So let's take the head of a country, a prime minister, a president. Who are they? Are they beholden to their subjects or the folks that they govern? So they are a servant to the people.
Look, here's the thing. And this is what I love. I mean, now we're talking political leadership, which is one dimension of leadership. Every person serving the government is called a public servant. And sometimes people forget that they are public servants serving the public, being a servant to the public, having the public's interest in mind. So when we talk about great leadership, the greatest leaders are the ones that took that call very seriously. The office of the president, the office of the mayor, the office of being a governmental official, a public servant. You serve the public. You're a servant. Leadership. That's it.
Yeah, I guess when you think of leadership, the government is a very logical next thing to think about. Let's take business, a founder, for example, entrepreneurship. Who is an entrepreneur serving as a leader? Or rather, a wannabe entrepreneur, a aspiring entrepreneur?
I meet a lot of people that want to be entrepreneurs for interesting reasons in my mind. A lot of people want to be business people because they want to make a lot of money. And there is nothing wrong with wanting to make money. It's normal. I can totally get it. The purpose of business is not to make money. The purpose of business is to create something that addresses a need, right? So if you say, I'm going to give you an analogy, Ishan. If you say the purpose of business is to make money, you're basically saying the purpose of life is to breathe. Same thing. You need to be able to breathe to live, and you need to be able to make money to create a business, sustain a business, but it's not the purpose. It's the sustenance. And if you apply business and entrepreneurial principles to your business, you will make money as a consequence, right? But it's not the purpose. It's one of the outcomes. The purpose of a business, as Peter Drucker, the father of management, actually said, the purpose of business is to create a customer that loves the product or the service that you have created. That too is leadership. That's business leadership, right?
So, would you say that the would be customers are the people you are serving? Effectively, that's what an
Yeah,
aspiring founder
yeah,
aspires to lead. That's whom they
yeah,
aspire to lead.
yeah. You serve not only the public, you serve the customer, the business community. You are addressing a need. And some of the great companies that have been created over the last 10, 15 years, it's only been a few years since COVID, the pandemic showed how creative people can be. All these companies, Airbnb, Uber, and so on, that have recently been created, they were created out of a frustration, of a need. Not because the owners woke up one morning thinking, I want to be independent, I want to be famous, I want to make money. No, they were frustrated. So the Uber guys went to New York, they were frustrated by the taxi system in New York. The Airbnb guys were frustrated by the regimen of hotels and hotel bookings and the quality of hotels. Virgin Airlines was created because Richard Branson was frustrated by British Airways, overcharged, poor quality. So these people were frustrated and created something that they felt the public needed. And then the rest is history, right?
As someone growing up in this day and age, but I'm sure this has happened to everyone who has grown up, you often hear some flavor of the argument of you should become a leader, you should aspire to be a leader. Do you think everyone should aspire to be a leader?
You know, very good question. I think, one, we all have the capacity to lead. And I think in some sense, we should all be leaders, again, in different capacities. I also realize not everybody will be a leader, but leadership comes in all shapes and forms, right? Sometimes when we think about leadership, we think about something heavy, like leadership or business leadership. But you can be a leader within your family. You can be a husband, you can be a wife, you can be a good sibling, you can be just a good friend, you can work on a project, you can help a person. I think leadership is quiet, but oftentimes it's the attention that people want for their leadership. Look what I've done. Look at me. Look where I am. Look what I've done. Look how I've helped the world. Look how I've changed the world. Leadership comes in all shapes and forms, right? It's a decision. And I think some of the best leadership probably never even gets recognized and noticed. Helping a person in need, right? Anonymously. No accolades, no recognition.
I think this just reminded me of this one conversation I was overhearing. I think motherhood, in a way, is leadership. It's a role that every mother takes on, and it's one that doesn't get celebrated. Let's create a hypothetical, Franco. If you had a magic wand and you could instill leadership qualities, which we'll get into, in every single person on the planet, how do you think the world would change?
Amazingly, it would change amazingly, right? And
No, but what would change? What do you think would change?
look, what does humanity aspire? I think we all want to grow. We want to progress. I think we want to have, I'm making a big assumption here. I think we all want peace. But then
I think
maybe
that's a
not
fair
everybody,
assumption.
wants peace, right? I want peace, and I believe that the vast majority of people can actually coexist. Now we can all coexist in peace, right? We may have different religions, different cultures, different upbringings, different values, perspectives. We should be able to coexist. So humanity has to learn to live together in peace and harmony, right? And if we all do our part and just take on this, I want to be a human and live out my humanity, I think the world will be a better place. And this is where leadership comes in, starting with self-leadership. Because again, before you can serve humanity, you need to learn to lead yourself. And I think a lot of people fail right there and then, including me, right? Because it starts with self, to control your life. You, y- you've got to be disciplined in your life, again, and we can go into that in more detail later on. How do you live your life? A life of focus, a life of purpose, a life of discipline. How do you control? How do you manage self, your emotions, and so on?
Do you think a leader has to have their, for the lack of a better word, their to be able to lead others? Because I'll tell you why. You often hear stories of leaders, and of course, as history moves on, leaders of the past get glorified and they become this larger than life figure. But there are stories of many leaders who have had quite troubled personal lives. I'm just thinking off the top of my head, JFK, someone who is heralded for his great leadership. He's someone who had a lot of, let's just say, very colorful life, right? And it doesn't seem like he had his order, at least his personal life. And so that's where I struggle with, should a leader have all their, should a leader have their life in order to be able to lead others?
It's a great question. And I do too. I struggle with this notion of, do you have to have yourself together in order to be an effective leader? And of course, there is a lot of evidence, anecdotal evidence, historical evidence, that some of the greatest leaders, they failed in their personal lives, right? Would that still make them a great leader? So they've sold out, they've fought for the nation, they've held public office, and they've sacrificed so many things, yet they failed in their personal lives. Does that still make them a great leader? I don't have the answer to that. What I do know, and again, that's debatable, subject to opinion, debate, and so on. If you want to be serious about leading others, you have to learn to lead self, or at least start with the self. The who am I? What is my purpose? What is my mission? What are my values and why? Once you've got that intact, in order, then I think you can go to that next step. Okay, now I think I'm ready to lead others.
Let me tell you my thesis. I feel, as both a leader and a follower, let me assume my follower role for now. In the leaders that I see vying for me being their follower, I look for those leaders who can show some vulnerability, who can admit when they have been wrong, and who can crucially admit their flaws. I would much rather follow someone who admits that they don't have this game of life figured out. I think that's a lot more relatable than someone who tries to project this false sense of confidence, which I feel is the underlying assumption behind anyone who wants to be a leader. You need to project this strength, this idea that you have everything in order. I'd much rather follow someone who admits that they don't have things in order.
Absolutely correct. And this is what we call, I'm using jargon here, this is what we call authentic leadership. Authentic leadership is basically showcasing your vulnerabilities, your weaknesses, your failures. You being the real you. You are authentic. You are authentic with self, and you are authentic with the public, right? That's authentic leadership. And then, of course, you could go and say, okay, and the person still, every person, every leader needs to continue to learn, needs to continue to grow, needs to continue to reflect and become better, no matter who you are and no matter what office that you hold. Authentic leadership is a leadership of vulnerability, a leadership of authenticity, a leadership of integrity, and a leadership of total transparency. Now, this is where culture comes in. What does the culture expect of you? What does the culture expect of a leader? So, someone like you, Ishan, maybe you're currently in India and you are a leader for the following reasons. And then you go and operate in a completely different market, China, certain parts of Asia, Western Europe, US. The cultural norms, the cultural expectations change. And so, do you change your style? Do you change the you in order to accommodate the cultural pressures and norms? These are your decisions to make, right?
And there's no right or wrong answer, I assume. It's just how you play your cards.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, of course, again, I'm using a couple of geographies here. In Asia, in certain parts of Asia, there is an expectation that the leader is strong. In other parts of the world, leadership is strong when you are weak, when you show I have failed, vulnerabilities, weaknesses. So, but I think you need to be true to yourself, right? And if you want to grow, and I'm not saying every leader wants to grow, if you want to grow sincerely, then you need to be authentic, at least with self. You may not be willing to be authentic to the public, but you need to be authentic with self and have a good look at yourself. Who am I? What's driving me? Why do I do what I do? And work on that sincerely and authentically and persistently. And then two things come into play. And what I do, Ishan, is I travel the world. I meet a lot of people. Sometimes I only get a minute or two with people. And I always ask the same question, apart from many other questions. I always ask the same question, which is, give me one example of good leadership, or what leadership trait or what principle do you look for in a person? How do you self-manage? How do you self-leadership and so on? And what I've been noticing over the years is two traits really stand out. One trait is discipline. And I think discipline works in every culture. It's a timeless principle. Be disciplined. And discipline sounds so boring, but it's so effective. It's so effective. And I could give you endless concepts of how discipline shapes those concepts to have a disciplined life. And this is how kids learn. If you look at how a child is raised, learns, thrives, it's all about discipline, right? Do this, then do that every single day, persistently, consistently. Discipline. I'm a sports fan, and I used to study Bruce Lee's life, and a lot. And he famously said, I don't fear the fighter who knows 10,000 kicks. I fear the fighter who practiced one kick 10,000 times. Discipline. Same thing every day, no matter what it is. Public speaking, whether it's fixing a toilet, whether it's cooking a meal, whether it's playing football, soccer, as we are now in the FIFA season. Discipline. One thing every day, 7 days a week, 30 days a month, 365 days a year, over years. Become the best. Discipline. That's one thing. Second one is focus. You need to focus. We live busy lives, Ishan. Lots of distractions, right? Family, work, media, social media. We are being pulled in different directions. You're supposed to do this. You're supposed to look like that. All these you're supposed to. No. Decide for yourself what's good for me, and then focus on that. Discipline, focus. Discipline, focus. The former Prime Minister of Malaysia, his name is Tun Mahathir, oldest serving politician in the world. History will tell us whether he was successful or not successful. People love him, people hate him. He said the same thing. Two things in leadership: discipline, focus. Simple, right? But it's boring, Ishan, doing the same thing every day, right? We live in a world, we want excitement, right? Leadership is hard work. Leadership is hard work, and it's a sacrifice. It's a daily sacrifice, and it's everything. It's all encompassing. Your mental health, your emotional health, your physical health, your cognitive health. Build in discipline and focus in each of these areas every single day. It matters how you sleep. It matters what you eat. It matters what you listen to, who you engage with. All these things, focus, discipline, focus, discipline, comes back to that.
I think there's one thing people should probably take from this conversation is just those two words, the power of those two words.
And also, I want people to recognize, and again, leadership is service. There is one leadership style that has been debated over the years, which is servant leadership. We are all servant. We are all servant of someone, of something, right? Now, one of my students the other day said to me, I agree with you that everyone is a servant to someone. We all have a boss. But there is one person that doesn't have a boss. Who is that?
The person on top, right?
Maybe not. Let's not go into religion. He said the only person that he knew that doesn't have a boss is Elon Musk. He has no boss. He structured his company so that he reports to himself. I mean, he still has a boss, right? He still needs the right visa to be able to operate. He still needs all the business license. He has a boss, of course. But when you think about leadership, you also need to think about accountability, which is the question, who are you accountable to? And that's why you find leadership as small as in a marriage, in a relationship, in families. Who are you accountable to? Because leadership is responsibility. And with responsibility comes accountability. Why? Because leadership has power. Who are you accountable to? And again, accountability is not a very sexy term. We don't want to be accountable to anyone. I want to be independent. I want to be free. I want to be independent. Reality is we are all accountable to someone. The question is who? Who are you accountable to? And I think a fallacy or a blind spot in leadership is when all of a sudden a leader, hierarchically speaking now, gains prominence, moves up the ranks, goes to director, general manager, president, CEO, VP, president, all of these titles. And then they realize, wow, I've got all this power, I have all these benefits, I have all this freedom. That's when you need accountability. That's when you need someone in your life that say, I'm watching you, and I am not agreeing with you on this, and this. But when we study leadership, again, I'm not trying to be political here, historically, the people that have fallen, political leaders, historical leaders, military leaders, religious leaders, they have fallen because they lacked accountability. They decided, I am no longer accountable to anything and anyone. I'm the boss. Very dangerous. That's the beginning of your downfall.
The moment you think that you are a quote unquote untouchable person, I guess that's when you know how much you can be touched, so to speak. I want to hear your take on this statement from, I believe it was Harry Potter, and I'm paraphrasing. This idea that some of the best leaders are those who never sought it, but had the mantle of leadership thrust upon them, and who found that they wore that mantle pretty well. What do you make of this statement?
And thank you for saying that, Ishan. I think there is probably a self-discovery part in leadership. And I think most of the audience listening to this podcast would fall under this category. I need to find out who I am. I need to find out my purpose, my mission, my values, and then become the leader that I'm supposed to be, to serve humanity. But then, of course, contextually, situationally, there are also situations where people are born into certain backgrounds, castes, families, and so on, where you are given a mandate. We expect this of you, and you need to play that role. It's not about discovering self. No, no, no. We're going to tell you who you're supposed to be and what you're supposed to do. Different type of leadership, of course. Yeah.
Take us into a time where you were called upon to be a leader, either by society or just by your own life circumstance. What is a moment that you just had to become a leader simply because the circumstance dictated it?
That's many, many situations. At school, we need to do a task, a project. We need a leader. Okay. Who is going to be the leader? Or you play sports, you create a team. Who is the leader? In a relationship, you have to have a leader. In a family, you have to be a leader. You become a parent, you need to become a leader. So again, sometimes life is such that you don't choose leadership. Leadership chooses you. Okay. Now you're a parent. Be the leader you need to be, right? At other times, maybe we have a little more time. Okay. I'm thinking of running a project. I'm thinking of building a business. I'm thinking of education. Okay. I'm growing into that role of leadership. Again, different situations. I think the best, again, for me, leadership has taught me. It's not that I am looking for leadership. Leadership has found me. So some of the most painful situations in life taught me most about leadership. Leadership is not Leadership is not to be confused with comfort. Leadership is not to be confused with entitlement. Leadership has to do with pain, sacrifice, and servanthood, as we discussed. Yeah.
Can you help me understand this one situation from my life? I'm going to take you back to my undergraduate days. We had a class assignment. It was a group project, and turns out people in my group did not want to work. So we had to meet as a group to sort of discuss how the project's going to go. And I found that at this point in time, this person isn't free. At this point in time, that person isn't free. And no one was taking charge. And so I decided, and it was an entrepreneurship course, mind you. So you'd assume that the entrepreneurship spirit would be there in all the students. Anyways, I decided, listen, this is the time we're going to meet. If you can make it, you can make it. If you can't make it, it will be noted and it'll be reported. And then what happened after that was I took that leadership position. Everyone else quickly fell into place, so to speak. They decided, okay, Shan, you're the leader. You only lead the group. And then I assumed this role. No one appointed me this role, but I assumed the role of delegating tasks, saying you do this, you do that. It's not as if I didn't do the work. I gave myself a task, but I gave myself that power to delegate, and others just, for the lack of a better word, capitulated. And so I found myself thinking afterwards, did I just assume power? No one handed me this power. I just assumed this power. And is that an inherently ethical thing? I had this whole ethical discussion with myself, and I haven't resolved it yet. So I'm going to ask you to help me resolve it.
No, it's a wonderful example. And I think we can all relate to that, Ishan. I think all of us listening to this podcast here, we've been in situations in life, we know whether it's school or sports or family, where a responsibility, a task needed to be performed, and no one stepped up. And maybe people looked at us and I go like, everybody looking at me, does that mean I'm supposed to be the leader? And I think there is truth to that. And of course, now I'm in my 50s. When I look back in my teens and in my 20s, I was in countless situations where there was a need, there was a responsibility, there was a task to be performed, and no one stepped up, and people looked at me as though I'm the pre-designated lead. I'm like, why me again? That's leadership. And then, as you said, okay, all right, I have accepted the mandate. I own the leadership. And with leadership comes all of that: authority, power, the power to delegate, the power to reward and punish, all of these things. These are aspects of leadership. As soon as you own, see, leadership is a concept that you needs to be owned. Okay, now I own leadership. It's a little bit like, I'm giving you an example, and I see this all the time as I travel the world. I'm a big fan. I love beaches, and I go to beaches frequently. What saddens me is nowadays I see a lot of rubbish on the beach. So instead of complaining about the beach is dirty or there's rubbish everywhere, do something about it. Just pick something up. That too is leadership. So the moment you own the problem, you see the problem, it bothers you, and maybe the little voice inside you says, hey, do something about it. And then we have a choice, right? Oh, I'm too busy. I'm with my family. I don't have the money. I don't have the time. There's lots of reasons not to accept leadership. Own leadership. That decision makes you a leader instantly. So leadership actually is ownership. You own that problem, that situation for a moment in time. That's leadership.
I think in some situations, leadership can be contagious. I have a story from my life, and it's so interesting that you said this. I was fortunate enough to go on a family holiday to the Maldives, and I found that there was a lot of trash that just floated out because people would drink coconut water and then throw the straws. And straws, you must know, are the worst thing for marine wildlife. And so I happened to pick it up, and I was this 14-year-old scrawny kid just trying to pick up the straws he could find. And lo and behold, after an hour, there was this whole gang of other tourists, and we were just picking up stuff. The place where I'm struggling is related to something that you said earlier, this idea of the pre designated leadership. I found in my life, because I'm someone who's okay with speaking up. Let's say a speaker comes to school or comes to university and delivers a talk. It is polite and you're almost obliged in some sense to ask a few questions, right? Maybe you're interested, maybe you're not, but I think it's courteous to respect that person's time and the effort that they've put in and ask them a question. I happen to become that person who asked questions. But what I noticed was a few speakers in, that when the next speaker came in and they gave their speech, at the end, during the question section, everyone would just turn, just like what you said. Everyone would turn to look at me. And I found myself thinking that I never asked for this position. I don't think it's fair for me to be the one who's expected to ask this question. And I'm struggling to figure out how to deal with that.
It's wonderful. And it's a matter of leadership finding you, Ishan. And again, I see a genuine drive of people wanting leadership. They want to be a leader, but sometimes I wonder why, right? Why do you want to be a leader? Are you wanting the recognition? Are you wanting the title? Are you wanting the attention? What is it exactly that you're wanting? And what should be happening is, if you are meant to be a leader, then yeah, leadership will find you. You still have the choice to say no to leadership, but leadership will find you and the opportunities will present themselves to you. Again, whether it's family or business or, as we said before, public office, social, anything, leadership will find you. There will be opportunities to lead every day.
Can I be honest though? If I am very truthful, when I think of those moments where I find leadership thrust upon me, I feel compelled to do it simply because that's the right thing to do. But on some deep level, not the primary reason, but I do feel like I want to be seen as the leader. I like part of the vanity that comes with leadership. I cannot say that that's not something that appeals to me. If I'm being very honest, there's an element of vanity that I strive for when I strive to be a leader. And I don't know if that's a good thing.
It's okay. Ishan, it's totally okay because, and again, your primary driver is not the recognition. But if you want recognition for your leadership, that's fine. In a healthy way, within reason, right? And of course, and again, being mindful of the audience here, a lot of us are on social media. We want to tell the world what we're doing day in and day out. So if you do something meaningful in terms of leadership, you want your followers, your friends, to like you, right? And to like what you're doing. There's nothing wrong with that. But if the pure driver, like if you say, okay, I'm going to the beach to pick up trash, so in order I can go and post it online, then the motivation is wrong, right? But if you want recognition for what you do, perfectly fine. Perfectly, again, within reason, in a healthy shape or fashion. Yeah.
Yeah, so there is a line to be drawn.
Yeah.
I think it's also, in a way, a test of your leadership to see how well you draw that line.
Yeah. Absolutely. And leadership tests you. No matter what you do, you will have moments of doubt. You will have moments of complete, darkness. And that's when you go deep inside yourself and say, what's this really all about? Goes back to the why, the mission, the why. What drives me? What's the energizing for? And this happens to the best of the best. Most notably, Elon Musk, he's repeatedly talked about the days when Tesla was nearly bankrupt, when SpaceX was nearly bankrupt. He'd run out of money and he had one more go before everything kind of imploded and collapsed. That's just one high profile example. But every leader goes through doubts, maybe even depression. Like, why am I doing this? Because it's hard. Because leadership is hard. It's hard work and it's every day and it's never ending, right? So if you have a natural desire to be recognized on social media and your families for what you do and the sacrifices you make, it's okay. Again, within reason.
Let me pose another hypothetical to you. It's not a hypothetical. Let's say a country, or rather, let's say a company fails at something. Let's take a recent example. So, Nike, when I was growing up, Nike was the brand. It was all about winning. And now Nike is going down. And there's this argument that John Donahue, who's the CEO that got replaced, took the company in the wrong direction because he brought this, corporate consulting lens to the company that didn't fit its core spirit. Do you think it's fair to say that the company is going down because of him? Leave this specific example, just generally that argument that when a company is going down or a country is going down, it's solely the fall of the leader. I just imagine if I was the CEO, I'd have a million reasons to tell you why the company is going down. Is it fair to say that the rise and fall of a company or a country is the fault of that leader?
There is a life cycle to each company, right? And you mentioned Nike. So Nike cannot grow like this. There will be ups and downs. There will be peaks and troughs. There will be seasonal patterns and so on. I think we have a very myopic and short-term view of companies. And if there is a season where maybe sales are lagging a bit or going down, this may just be a setup for the next cycle up. I don't know, right? I don't know Nike well enough. Like you, I have seen Nike growing well massively, and now it's shifted back. It's shifted down a bit. Is this the beginning of a significant downturn, or is it the beginning of a significant upturn, a change that could come? Every business goes through these cycles, and I quoted Steve Jobs before. If you look at Apple, Apple had its ups and downs as well. What is key, though, is that the leader of a company needs to create a culture, and that culture should drive everything. It should drive business success. It should drive employee health and so on, all these different parameters. It's the culture. It is the leadership's responsibility to create a culture where people can thrive and grow and where all the stakeholders feel a sense of engagement and involvement and feel good about where the company is headed long term. Short terms, there will be bumps. Short terms, there will be ups and downs. So to To blame a CEO for that is harsh. It's also reality. Why? We live in a business situation where everything is measured quarterly, right? Quarterly, even monthly, KPIs and so on. So these guys are under enormous pressure to kind of bypass these ups and downs. It's harsh. The verdict is harsh. So again, the responsibility of business leadership is enormous. The pressures are enormous. And as a consequence, sometimes business leaders perhaps make uncalled, risky bets on things that they probably shouldn't, but they do because of the pressure from the stakeholders.
What do you do when you fail at leadership? Let's say you're a leader and you've had some successes, and then some decision you make doesn't work out. How should a leader take that?
It's a great question. And I think this is probably where culture comes in as well. So I've been reading this week a bit more about, again, watching the FIFA World Cup, the way Japan played and then they lost, and the way they showed their respect. And so the head coach immediately, seconds after the game, he addressed everybody and he bowed and he apologized for his failure. Was it his failure? Probably not. But he was the leader. And to be a leader and to take that responsibility is, to show that sense of ownership, because he owned the problem. They lost the game. It was a failure. So he needs to own it as much as he would own it if they succeeded, right? And this is where good leadership comes in again. A lot of people are quick to enjoy the success and show that, hey, look at my leadership, pride and all of that. But when they fail, you also need to be a leader. And that means you need to show it, you need to own the problem and show it in a culturally respectful fashion. I've also noticed a lot of coaches and senior players at the World Cup, the moment they lose a game, they resign. They retire. Is that the right decision? I don't know, but they seem to know. But from a leadership point of view, since you asked me, culturally speaking, the Japanese coach did not resign or retire. He bowed and he apologized very sincerely and authentically. That's strong leadership.
I think this is even true for smaller contexts. So you mentioned that leadership also plays a role in say a relationship, a romantic one or otherwise. And so if you in a relationship fail on some level, it is incumbent on you as a leader to apologize and to sort of own your mistake. In a smaller situation where there are just two people, a friendship, a relationship, can both be leaders?
I believe yes. I mean, of course, you could look at the dynamic leadership and followership, right? But even the follower can demonstrate leadership qualities. Both can be leader. Yes.
I think a lot of people, the people who have at least clicked on this episode, would aspire to be a leader on some level. We are all also followers, as we have established. Let's talk about what it means to be a good follower. I think we often talk about what it means to be a good leader. What does it mean to be a good follower?
Interesting question. So, looking at the leadership literature, usually talks about, in order to be a leader, you need to be a follower first. Yeah, there is truth to that. And of course, similar qualities apply, a sense of respect, authenticity, transparency, all of these things, intelligence, you name it. And I think respect is where then the culture and the situation comes in, right? So being a leader in the US would be very different from being a leader in India, very different from being a leader in China. So I think this is where a lot of context comes in: religion, culture, history, all of these things, right? But I think if you look at the characteristics of leaders and the characteristics of followers, they're strikingly similar.
That's interesting. I don't think anyone would intuitively put that together, but you are right. I see it now, at least having heard the logics played out in this conversation. With even with leadership, especially perhaps with leadership, people argue that there are these timeless qualities. Do you think leadership as an idea will change in the next 10 years or the
No,
next 20 years? Or
no.
will it change? Is it a timeless idea?
Yeah. So here's the thing. We seem to make out that leadership is a new concept. I think leadership is as old as humanity, right? It's thousands of years old, right? And maybe we have failed to study leadership adequately. Maybe we have failed to study and understand leadership. It's been around for a long time and it will always be around. Leadership has not changed at all, and leadership will not change at all. It's contextual, it's cultural, the principles are timeless. Now, society may have an opinion of what is good leadership and what is bad leadership. Society may have an opinion of what is strong leadership versus weak leadership. That can change over time. But the actual principles and dynamics of leadership is all about people. And I don't think we have stressed that enough in this podcast. Leadership is about people. I said before, leadership starts with self, but it's about others. Leadership essentially is connection. It's human connection. That's been around for thousands of years. It will be around for thousands of years. We are only at the beginning of understanding human connection. And this is where psychology and other concepts come in beautifully. Sociology, psychology, anthropology, all these things we need to bring in to understand leadership. It will not change. But the way the public understands leadership may change.
You often hear that leaders, or rather charismatic people, are prone to become good leaders. And I see that logic. It makes sense. Charisma, you attract people, therefore you can become a leader. Can an uncharismatic person become a leader?
Yes. You know, I think in line with what I'd said about leadership being misunderstood, charismatic leadership is particularly misunderstood. So the term charisma is actually a Greek term, and it means divine. It means a gift from God. So charismatic leaders have a gift from God. Now we all have gifts from God, right? Charisma is a little bit like a magnet. So when people ask me, how do I know if somebody is charismatic? Well, just walk into a room and certain people just have this aura, right? You're just drawn to them for whatever reason. That's maybe a little bit to do with charisma. Interestingly, when you study charismatic leadership, and in particular, people that have been touted as charismatic leaders, there are more toxic and poor and failed leaders in charismatic leadership than non-charismatic leaders. So charismatic leadership is full of negative, toxic evidence. If someone is not meant to be a toxic leader, or a charismatic leader, I should say, don't try and become a charismatic leader. Either you have it or you don't. Either you have that energy, either you have that DNA, that aura, or you don't. You cannot buy it. You cannot develop it. Either you have it or you don't. But the evidence is on the side of non-charismatic leadership.
So you're saying that charisma becomes a guise under which ineffective people become leaders.
Can happen.
I'm sure There are examples through history to prove that.
Oh, and again, because I read a lot of biographies of people, some of the most famous people in history, whether it's, again, I don't want to be offensive to anyone, whether it's a Stalin or a Hitler, they're all charismatic leaders. They were all charismatic leaders. Is every charismatic inherently evil? No. It's what do you do with that gift? If charisma is a gift from God, and if that charisma allows you to lead people in a certain way, then the responsibility is even greater. Is even greater. I came across something to that effect, Ishan, lately. It's a religious text. I won't disclose which religion it was because it's not relevant here. It talked about leadership and teaching. And that particular text said, you have all the freedoms in the world to choose whatever profession you want to do. If you want to become an electrician, become an electrician. If you want to become a plumber, become a plumber. There is one role which requires an exceptional level of leadership: being a teacher. Because now you have the power to influence people. The level of responsibility is even greater. So if you are a weak person, don't become a teacher, because you could do more harm than good in that capacity. Interesting, right?
Have you seen the movie Project Hail Mary?
I have not.
It's a recent movie, and the reason I bring it up is the premise is that the world is dying and humanity needs to nominate someone to save it, and they nominate a school teacher. And I think it speaks beautifully to this idea. A teacher, I can think of my teachers, the good and the bad ones. Most of them were good. I think managing a classroom of young children is perhaps much harder than managing billions of dollars in, say, a VC fund. I assume it's different skills, and there's a beautiful strength that you see in teachers that know how to do it well.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially the role of a teacher. I mean, think about language. The role of language, the role of communication. Language, either you build or you destroy. Whatever you say in every conversation, you build, you destroy. You choose. So choose your words wisely. And teachers have a way of teaching, have a way of using language, have a way of engaging, communicating. Build, destroy, build, destroy. You choose. Big responsibility every day.
I have a bunch of rapid fire questions to end on. In all these decades that you've spent studying leadership, what is something that you've changed your mind on?
Every day I change my mind about leadership. It's a work in progress. Again, I use leadership as a lens, and I look at current affairs and look at it from a leadership angle, a leadership point of view. We live in a fascinating time. I mean, every time is a fascinating time, but right now I think we are in a super fascinating time because of the role of technology and the way we communicate, the way we relate, engage, and so on. The workplace is changing. Countries are changing fast. And so what a great time to look at leadership. What I have learned over the years and continue to learn is a couple of things. One, you never grown as a leader. And that's why I go back to, I'm a student of leadership. I'm not, even though I'm a professor of leadership, essentially I'm a student of leadership. I need to learn every single day. And I learn from the people you would least expect it. It could be, you could go to a restaurant and talk to the service people. You learn from them. You could go on an Uber, on a taxi, learn from them. You learn every day. Listen. We need to listen. And that's how you hone your leadership. That's how you learn about life and leadership and all of that. And I guess for me, going back to the question is, every time I feel I have figured something out, I realize I haven't. Every time I feel like I have mastered this now, Then a new challenge pops up and go, oh, wow, okay, I need to rethink this. So what may work in one context, and leadership especially is very, very contextual. And it's taught me because I have lived and worked in 9 different countries. And every country is very different. No two same countries. And so what works in one context, what works in one culture, what works in one country may not work in another country. That's what I've learned. And I keep thinking, okay, how would this situation play out in another context, in another country? And maybe because we have different from people from different generations in this podcast, how does a 15-year-old understand my words or my approach to a 25, to a 35, to a 45-year-old person? Very, very different. Again, so maybe same message, but we have to package it a little bit differently. Yeah.
Maybe that's the hallmark of a good leader, right? The idea that you cannot know anything for certain, at least 100%. Tell me, is there a book or a piece of media that you think captures leadership at its core?
Yeah, I mean, look, there are the obvious ones. Peter Drucker wrote on management. Warren Bennis wrote on leadership. I have written on leadership. My books are on Amazon. Please buy them. Not just kidding. There is no one single book on leadership. And this is where there is a concept which is, it's called MLA, Management as a Liberal Art. And if you want to understand management, if you want to understand leadership, don't just study leadership. Study everything. Anthropology, sociology, psychology, history, literature, art, music, everything. Study everything. Because then you understand the world, then you understand life. So if you want to understand leadership, you need to understand life, which means read broadly, deeply, comprehensively, talk to everyone and listen. Listen more than you talk. 2 ears, 1 mouth. Listen twice as much as you talk. Listen, observe, reflect. Listen, observe, reflect.
Clearly, this whole conversation revolved around human leadership. What do you think about leadership in non-humans, in animals? Is that something that you've looked at?
Of course, yeah. I'm a pet owner. I have a love for pets. Of course, they teach you about life. Absolutely, yeah. They teach you about. Here's the thing, and we didn't touch on this, but I want the audience to think about this. There's 2 types of leadership, only 2 types. And even though we have different tools and leadership styles, and I could mention and unpack them, we won't have the time today. There's really only 2 types of leadership. Leadership by love, leadership by fear. Nothing else. Either you lead because you love people or you fear something. You decide. Do you love? Do you fear? And people that fear lead with fear and instill fear. People that love, they show love. They are loved in return. Love, fear.
I think we could have another conversation. Maybe we should another time. If someone is on their deathbed, ominous question, bear with me, and they're looking back at their life, what is that one thing that they can look at which would tell them that they've been a good leader?
I'm going to answer the question with a research insight that I've gained. At Harvard, they did a longitudinal study. They looked at what's the one element that is correlated with long life. And of course, you could make certain assumptions. Well, it has to do maybe with DNA or, your quality of life or exercise or dieting or all of that. What they have found, and again, it's a longitudinal study across cultures, across generations, over a long period of time. The one predictor of long life is engaging with people. That's it. So if you want a person to die and die fast, take their friends and their families away. They die very fast. Same with pets, by the way, right? A dog, a cat. I have a bunny. It's the quality of our relationships, Ishan, that determines the quality of life. And the people that have died before they die, because I've spoken to people about that too. I've spoken to nurses, I've spoken to people in aged care centers. What do people regret? They don't regret not working enough. They don't regret not being an entrepreneur. They don't regret. What they regret is they did not spend enough time with people. I didn't spend enough time with my wife. I didn't spend enough time with my children. I did not seek out my friends. The level of your relationships and the quality of your relationships is directly correlated to health, well-being, longitude, and quality of life, ultimately. Yeah. So I don't think people before they die say, I wish I had more money in my bank account. I don't think that people wish that I should have bought that Lamborghini car. I don't think people wish I wish I had have done my PhD. No, it's all to do with the relationships that they missed out on.
I have a closing tradition on this podcast. Every guest I ask gets this one question. If you had access to billboards across the world for just one day, what message would you put up there?
Okay, since we are talking about leadership, the billboard would say, what is your excuse?
Beautiful. I think we should just end it there. That's the best ending I could imagine. Truly, truly. Franco, this was fantastic. Thank you for your time.
Ishan, my pleasure. And yeah, look forward to further conversations.
Thank you so much for listening. Before you go, I have 3 small requests to ask you. If you enjoy listening to the episode, then please subscribe. Second, please share this with someone who you think will find it valuable. You see, a lot of effort and time goes into creating these podcasts. And so by sharing it, you'll help me reach new audiences, and that'll help keep the show alive. Third, please tell me your thoughts. You can reach out to me on social media, on email, and so on, and tell me what you enjoyed, what you didn't like, and new guests and episodes that you'd like to have discussed on the podcast. Again, thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next episode.